Dwight Spangler. I'm the chapter president for the Dan River Sons of American Revolution Virginia Society, and I have the distinct honor of welcoming you here today on the 244th anniversary crossing of the dam. If you would, each of you are given a handout. The order's going to be changed just a little bit due to some last-minute technical changes, but we're still going to make this thing happen. But if you would look on the very back, there's a couple things I'd like to bring to your attention. And that being that this event is possible because we have sponsors. All of those are listed there. They graciously donated and helped us with this program. In addition, we have several special acknowledgments of different groups and people that have helped and really put forth an effort and see the benefit of this Crossing the Dam celebration being held every year. So those are much appreciated. But the one that I'm most proud of is the last, the Crossing the Dam committee. This year I inherited the chairmanship of it, and Gary Hall was very much smiling when he saw me take it because he knew what I was in for, but I couldn't tell you this is a better group to work with, and they have put in a lot of effort. And each one of them is walking around and have a green pin on or a green ribbon that says they're a Crossing the Dam committee member. And I'd like to call them by name if you would. Please either throw your hand up or stand to be recognized. But we have Gary Lee Hall, Barbara Bass, Douglas Powell, Matthew Abbott, Mike Geisinger, Boyd and Shirley Archer, Stan Connor, Ted and Jane Daniel, Ben Owen, Paul Smith, Carl Espy, and Doug Ford. Please give these folks a round of applause. And I must apologize for my voice. I've been fighting the flu or the cooties all week. So a couple other things I want to bring to your attention is we've got the Halifax County Historical Society there. They're selling different wares. We'd ask that you go visit them. I think they've got some really good deals on some artwork as well. And over in the back, the Dan River chapter's got the annual challenge coins. And this year we also have a new commemorative poster. Pretty proud of that. One of our members had that artwork commission. We put it in a poster design, and it really looks nice framing, plus it's a nice fundraiser for us. So with that in mind, we do have a framed edition of that we're going to present to our MC, Dr. Phil Williams, and just tell him thank you for all that he's done to help us over the years. And then we also have one with Dr. Babbitt's we'll give him. So at this time, I'd like to introduce you to our MC for the day, who's past professor president. That would be Dr. Phil Williams.
Thank you so much. Yes, I appreciate it. Well, I would like to also welcome you all here today. And it seems we're not quite as hardy as our patriot ancestors. We're not going outside today. But in solidarity with them, I have ordered that the heat be turned off in the building. But I've consented to keep the Vista Dome closed. So we have a wonderful ceremony here that we've been doing for 11 or 12 years now. It's actually started in 2006 or 7 by my state presidency. We had this instituted as a national event, and it has grown, and it's terrific, and I'm so happy you all are here. So without further ado, let me ask for Chaplain Jimmy Landrum to come from Dan River Chapter and give us an invocation.
Could you stand for invocation? We'd like to remember one of our co-patriots here in the county, Paul Smith. He lost his sister, vice president of our local chapter. Let's remember him in our prayers as well. May we pray. Almighty God, giver of all good things, we thank you for the United States of America and its founders who gave us our freedom, for the air that gives the breath of life, and for the sun that warms us, for our homes and the friends we love, and for the food that fortifies our lives. Calls us to show our thankfulness by giving as freely as we have received, in service to our country and helping those in need. In his holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. So I will now call for the presentation of the colors from the Halifax County High School JROTC. Mr. Boyd Archer, Treasurer of Dan River Chapter, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Carolyn Landrum, would you now lead us in the singing of the national anthem?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Order. Arm. Right. Face.
National Commander Scott Collins and the Virginia Society Sons of the American Revolution Color Guard. Post colors. Advance colors.
Again, up! Roll, sword! Left shoulder, balance! Carry, forward! March up, march! Forward! March! Present columns. Present colors. Order colors. Carry colors.
Turn the side so the eagle faces. Yeah.
Left shoulder, forward. To the march. Face. Mark time, mark. Close. Right. Forward. March.
Let's have a round of applause for the SAR Color Guard. It's time for welcoming remarks, and I would like to invite Councilman Joe Chandler of the town of South Boston to offer remarks. Thank you, sir.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone here today. On behalf of Mayor Ed Owens, Vice Mayor Sharon Harris, Town Manager Matt Canlon, and Assistant Town Manager Dennis Barker, along with South Boston Town Council, I extend a warm welcome to each of you to the town of South Boston for the 19th annual commemoration of the crossing of the Dan. The town of South Boston joins you in celebrating and commemorating the 244th anniversary of the crossing of the Dan, a critical moment in the Revolutionary War that is considered a significant turning point in the Southern campaign. Over the span of 19 years, this event has grown from being a local commemoration to one that has risen to national recognition. Needless to say, it takes a lot of work, not only on the part of our local area organizations, but also on the part of various state and national organizations to make this commemoration the great event it has become. On behalf of the town of South Boston and its citizens, we thank the Dan River Chapter of Virginia Society, Sons of the American Revolution, Berryman Greene Chapter, NSDAR, Halifax County Historical Society, South Boston Halifax County Museum of Fine Arts and History, everyone here that represents Virginia organizations, those from other visiting states and national organizations, and officials and agencies of the town of South Boston, the town of Halifax, and Halifax County for all they do in making this outstanding multi-day event possible. Again, we warmly welcome all of you visiting our town, and we hope that you will return often to visit South Boston, Halifax County, and its amenities and attractions anytime you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite the Vice Mayor, Gail Bossiger, town of Halifax.
On behalf of Mayor Dexter Gillum, the town council members, and all the citizens of the town of Halifax, I offer greetings to you and welcome you to our celebration. The town of Halifax is our county seat, and it is the location of the Halifax County Courthouse, the Halifax County War Memorial, and the Halifax County Historical Society. We hope you will take a moment to visit some of these historical sites in our town. You will also find 4 excellent restaurants located on Main Street, as well as 2 antique shops and an antique mall. So we welcome you to visit our little village. As we celebrate General Nathanael Greene and the troops, their outmaneuvering of Lord Cornwallis and the British troops, we are reminded that they were exhausted and in need of fresh supplies when they got to the little town of Halifax. They spent a week resting and replenishing, and much of that replenishing was done by our citizens of the town and of the county. They stayed at the old Halifax Courthouse. That was their campsite, which is actually located down next to the King's Crossing and really close to Crystal Hill. Greene now had a real advantage over the British troops. Hence, the crossing of the Dan is now identified as a turning point of the war. Thank you to each of you for coming out and celebrating this event. I hope you enjoy the remainder of your day and spend a little bit in our little village of Halifax. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Gail's the only one that I remember. There's been a changing of the guard this year, so I'm introducing all new people, with the exception of Gail. So now I'd like to invite Supervisor Robbie Smart, Halifax County Board of Supervisors, to come forward and offer his remarks.
Good morning. You guys have been with me. I left my reading glasses, so this may be a little difficult, but
I'd offer you mine, but
that's okay. I'll wing it. I'm putting it in big font. This will be short. First, welcome from the Halifax County Board of Supervisors. And as I was driving in, just real quick, some of you may know that Boyd's Ferry, aka South Boston, began its existence on the south side of the Dan River. And in the early 1800s, they moved it to the north side because of the ravages of constant flooding. Sound familiar? Anyway.
4 out of 5 years.
Yeah. And the Halifax County Board of Supervisors welcomes you and appreciates the Sons of the American Revolution orchestrating and the invitation to us for today's events, commemorating General Greene's crossing of the Dan some 244, nearly 250 years ago. We'd also like to commemorate the Sons of the American Revolution for their work years ago, having this event brought to national prominence. We appreciate that for the dollars it brings in tourism and also for maintaining the knowledge of an important historical event. Again, welcome from the Halifax County Board of Supervisors, and enjoy today's events.
Thank you, sir. Past experiences prologue, I suggest that we have a permanent station of FEMA people here down by the river. We almost never get down there. Okay, I think Darren Schmidt's going to offer greetings on behalf of the Virginia State Society. Darren, would you like to come forward? Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Darren Schmidt. I'm the first vice president of the Virginia Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. It's great to see everybody come out today. I'd like to thank the Dan River Chapter and the many other organizations and committees that host this event for the opportunity to be here and bring greetings to you on behalf of the Virginia SAR State President, Michael Weiler, and the over 2,000 members of the Virginia Society. The Crossing of the Dan event holds a particular place in my heart. For starters, this was one of the first real events that I attended as a member of the SAR representing my chapter. We were outside, and the dignitaries were on a stage at an open pavilion near here, freezing their toes off, I believe. I've learned a lot since then. One of the most important things I've learned, particularly as an active member of the SAR's Color Guard, is that commemorations of the Battle of Cowpens always guaranteed to be cold. The Memorial Day parade in Washington, D.C. is going to be hot. But the crossing of the Dan, well, now that's a toss-up. In the past 20 years or so, I've seen hot, cold, rain, dry, wind, mud, flood, and snow. It's a testimony to the types of conditions that our ancestors had to endure as they fought for their rights and the independence that they believed in. But most importantly, I've seen the Crossing of the Dan event evolve into a community-wide historical event that educates those that live and travel here with overtones of patriotism. History, education, and patriotism, the three tenets of the Sons of the American Revolution. The South Boston and surrounding community has embraced and expounded on the events of 244 years ago to honor our patriot ancestors. But it's not just about their lives and their actions, though we should strive to never forget. It's also about serving our communities and our country in ways that honorably reflect their sacrifices. Congratulations to the towns of South Boston and Halifax, the community, local officials, and planning committees that continue to make this such an impactful event each year. I look forward to celebrating the crossing in coming years, particularly the 250th commemoration that is fast approaching. Thank you.
Father Time, I hope to be here then too. I don't know, I'm sure you'll be here. Anyway, let me move on right now and to Carl Espy IV from the Crossing Planning Committee, who will introduce our speaker today. Carl.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm Carl Espy, the Halifax Town Manager, and I've had the great privilege of being a part of the Crossing the Dan Committee for the past several years. So it's exciting to see how this commemoration has continued to grow. It's also my great privilege to introduce Dr. Lawrence Babbitts, the author of A Devil of a Whipping, who I believe makes his third visit to South Boston in the Commonwealth of Virginia this time, north of William Byrd's dividing line. He's come back by very, very popular demand. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version that I assured him I would as far as his background. He being the East Carolina University Professor Emeritus, receiving a BA and MA from the University of Maryland, College Park, a former ACC conference, I believe, and a PhD he received from Brown University. Dr. Babbitts has extensive experience in military and maritime archaeology. He has excavated battlefields, fortifications, and a World War II POW camp. In addition to his academic side, he served 3 years in the U.S. Army, largely in B Company, 1st Battalion, 21st Infantry, the Gimlets. And he has been a reenactor since 1961, especially as a Revolutionary War and Civil War private soldier. He is currently involved with researching smoothbore musketry accuracy and shooting Civil War weaponry competitively with the 1st Maryland Infantry of the North-South Skirmish Association. He was the McCann Taggart Lecturer for the American Institute of Archaeology in 1995, was named George Washington Distinguished Professor of History by the North Carolina Society of the Cincinnati in 2003, Fellow of the Company of Military Historians in 2006. His most recent book, Long, Obstinate, and Bloody, deals with the 1781 Battle of Guilford Courthouse. It was co-written with Josh Howard and published by the University of North Carolina Press in 2009. He is currently writing books on the Battle of Hubkirk Hill and Eutaw Springs and the sieges of Augusta, Georgia, and 96, South Carolina, clearly covering most of the Southern campaign, I believe. Our charter members of the Crossing of the Dan Committee, Barbara Bass and Douglas Powell, have been instrumental in maintaining a connection with Larry Babbitts these many, many years. Douglas was able to take him for a brief tour of the area yesterday before the weather came in, pointing out where the Coles Ferry Wagon Road Trace is located, which served as a vital path during Greene's encampment at Old Halifax Courthouse north of the Bannister River. Larry relayed to Barbara and Douglas that preparing this year's talk exposed a lot of gaps in my knowledge of the area. So we are now fortunate to learn more about what his research has revealed about Virginia's critical role in the race of the Dan. Please offer a warm welcome to Dr. Lawrence Babbitts.
Well, while there's a technical delay, let me say one thing. One group of people has been omitted in credits for this, and so I would like to ask all the veterans to stand up. I don't mean Continental Army veterans, I mean veterans of the 20th century military service. Thank you. Okay, now, all right, this title has changed about 5 times since they first contacted me.
And as it worked out, I was working on something to do with logistics for the Continental Cavalry in the Southern Campaign. And so, since this is a focal point of that, I went and laid out what I thought about it. And you can read it, and I'll talk over what you're seeing. But the idea is that an army travels on its stomach, both the horses and the men's, and they have to have equipment. And the further Greene came from South Carolina and towards Virginia, the farther he is pulling the British from their storehouses and their fleets in Charleston and Wilmington. And the closer he got to it, the easier it was for him to supply. And even then, the race to the Dan was a close run thing. Now, the reason that he came here is what I would call the Nathanael Greene Trail. Having spent a little bit of time thinking about Vietnam, I thought that the Ho Chi Minh Trail was nothing compared to the stuff that Nathanael Greene had to do. At least people followed the orders and got the things going in Vietnam. Here, he couldn't get Congress from any state to really commit to supplying them. And this is just a portion, starting in Philadelphia, which was an assembly point, bringing things in from New England, upstate New York, and they had to wait for things to come from those places. They then went basically eventually following Route 29 in many places until they got to the Virginia line. And here they stopped, the supply convoys stopped until probably about the first week in May of 1781. The reason for it was the British were here, the British were there, the British were here, and it was a constant threat to interdiction of that supply train. This is a set of the distances. It's not just that there's 2 inches on the map that translates to 20, 40, 60, 80 miles. These are distances that people were walking. And in doing this, there's one category here that the rest days are river crossings. No river was crossed in one day by one of these armies or one of these convoys. It just took too long, and so that became incorporated as part of their rest days. Now, the race to the Dan's end segment began at Guilford Courthouse, where the two parts of the Southern Continental Army rejoined. Everybody is focused on what happened with Daniel Morgan and the Flying Army, and Greene having ridden overland with a sergeant's guard, meeting them west of Salisbury and coming to Guilford Courthouse. But there was a sizable contingent of regiments that came from Shiraz, South Carolina on the Pee Dee River and marched and got to Guilford Courthouse on the 8th of February. And in the interim of their 2-day stay at Guilford Courthouse, I think that Greene probably laid out his idea of the battle that would come in March. And in doing this, he knew the landscape very well. In fact, he thought he might have to fight there, and he actually called one of his few councils of war to make a decision about that. But the Americans were just simply too short of everything they needed, but they didn't realize how bad off the British were too. But the race to the Dan, this last segment, is the longest battle in terms of distance and time that was fought in the Revolutionary War. For the most part, the advance guard of the British was in contact with the rear guard of the Continental Army virtually the entire way. There were gaps when people shifted their army, they seized a day's movement or something like that. And so, but it is a continuous contact situation. And it's not like the retreat from Lexington and Concord to Boston. It's not like the retreat from New York across New Jersey to Philadelphia, but which also had a surprise ending twist to it when Trenton and Princeton occurred, because the same thing happened here. And the key reason that Halifax became important is because of the two routes that led to come on, it does that to me all the time. From Prince Edward Courthouse, the Continental convoys coming from Philadelphia generally stopped there and unloaded. A lot of the wagons, which were owned by the wagoners who were carrying them in groups of 10 wagons and wagoneers, would then return to stages further up north. But there was another one that was collecting materials locally and from the Shenandoah Valley, and that was at New London. Prince Edward is still a river crossing. It's a town of Warsham now, but that was an arsenal. They were making cartridges there constantly. They're assembling all kinds of material, and you'll see some of that coming up. Okay, it's not just the names on the landscape. These are names that the soldiers in the Army knew, and they remembered anywhere from 30 to over 50 years later. And they appear on modern day maps and they spell out what the material is and the distances were that they traversed to get the Army back onto fighting trim. And most of the material that I used to put this together is from veterans' pensions and the writings of Nathanael Greene. Now, these pensions were written anywhere from 30 to 50 years after the Battle of the Southern Campaign. Loss of memory, but every one of them was, one, sworn testimony, and two, preceded by the statement, as best I can recollect. And I'll come back to show you how some of this stuff is really spot on accurate. But when you look at the landscape, here's a guy named James Irvin from Irvin's Ferry. Okay? He was involved in the movement of supplies long before Greene came here. So this is not just a catch up, sudden dropping in of about 1,500 Continental soldiers. This is something that is an area that had been long participating in the war effort. The pension accounts talk about this. A lot of them talk about Prince Edward Courthouse. And it's interesting to me that they don't mention South Boston. They mention Boyd's Ferry, they mention Irvin's Ferry, and they mention Halifax. And I'm curious, when was the town of South Boston founded as a town?
1878.
Okay, there you go. It's not an omission. It didn't exist. It's a ferry crossing. Now, how did they work that out so that Greene would be able to cross? Well, when he first came south, before he ever took the left wing of his army to Shiraz on the Pedee River in South Carolina, the first thing he did was have a look at what the landscape was. And he authorized Colonel Carrington to direct a survey of the river systems. And along with that, note the ferry crossings and the number of boats. And I've read the report that he made. There's everything from bateau to periaugers. I'll use the Carolina term for them. So he already knew this. In fact, when Greene moved into South Carolina, before he did, he sent Lee down there, and the first thing he told Lee was, you will go there and effect a junction with Francis Marion, but you will take steps to secure that all the ferry boats and watercraft on the river are moved to the side and away from possible British capture. He was well aware of it. He came from Rhode Island. He was a shipping, I want to say magnate, but that sort of gives him airs, I would say. He was a foundry operator, among other things. But the key thing is that none of this is happening in a vacuum. He had planned this out. Nobody's ever given Greene credit for being a very good general, but the proof is in the pudding. You've got South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and possibly Virginia are still in the United States. If he hadn't won them back, the British would have signed a peace treaty and kept the southern colonies. And he was aware of it, and his writing says that in the summer of 1781. And when you look at the organization that he's putting together, these are people that are coming from all over the place. His army wasn't just Virginians and Carolinians and the Marylanders and Delawares. His orderly sergeant was from Connecticut, and Greene met him in Rhode Island. Greene was from Rhode Island. The artificers, the mechanics who kept the army working were from Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey and other places. So this is truly a national army deployed a long way from where the people of origin were. Okay. Major John Mazaret was an artilleryman, and what he was assigned to do was act as a sort of a general ombudsman quartermaster for Greene. And his name appears repeatedly in the Prince Edward Courthouse records as getting materials. And here, look at the date. It's a week after the crossing of the Dan. Why is it a week? Well, I found that out when I found out how far Halifax was from Boyd's Ferry and Irvin's Ferry, and then how far Prince Edward Courthouse and New London were from Halifax. Okay, why is he in Halifax? Well, because now there are two rivers between his army and the British. And Greene was very astute in putting those potential water crossings as obstacles for the British. But when you look at this is everything you need. When you look at the number of men in the dragoons and you match that up against pistols and sabers, they hadn't lost a lot of stuff. Okay, muskets, the militia took a lot of muskets when they went home. It was a perennial cry of woe that Greene used all the time. And then you look at the cartridges and the cartridge boxes, slings, gun slings. By the first week in August of 1781, the Continental Army that's just getting ready to fight at Eutaw Springs did not have musket slings. They did not have bayonet slings or bayonet scabbards, okay, contrary to all the imagery that people have created. They were being issued, but the returns in the field say they didn't have them. They didn't have vests. They didn't have the little black stocks. They didn't have the garters around their legs. This was an army that had been stripped down for combat. And if it came to transporting things, it was more important to transport ammunition. You'll see something about that in a minute. But notice that the first thing that's up there on that list is marquees. General Greene's and General Hughes's and Otto Holland Williams in the same marquee. These are the leadership tents. They're sort of the manor house of the army. But you look at the common tents, 6 men per common tent, and you multiply that, and you figure you got 6 men per tent, roughly, the messmates, and that gives you an idea of how many people are available that they are wanting to cover up. Because during the race to the Dan, in the light infantry, you had 1 blanket for 4 men. 2 guys are snuggling to keep warm, 1 guy's tending the fire, and 1 guy's standing picket duty. That's well thought out, and they rotated. Okay, so you're on for 2 hours and you're off for 4, but 2 hours you're standing by the fire. Drums, fifes, yes indeedy, even down to the drumsticks. These are all things that break and wear out. Okay, this is just a listing of accoutrements. You know, your cartridge boxes and your other things that a soldier carried to keep himself prepared. But when you read them, they're scattered all through, and when you start adding these things up, it gets pretty big. And when you're doing it in the original handwriting, and I'm no great shakes when it comes to handwriting. My handwriting is at least as bad as William Washington's. The only general who wrote well is Uji, and his is a wonderful example of penmanship. You hear that, Barbara? The school teacher. Okay, the one thing on there was a cartridge box. During 1780, when the Maryland-Delaware line came south, they were outfitted in March at Morristown and marched south. They got a whole new issue. And this is the time when the Army is going over to a standardized set of equipment. Muskets, 69 caliber French muskets. Everybody said they didn't have those then. Well, in South Carolina, they were issuing French muskets in 1778 to South Carolina militiamen. And so clearly, if they can do that give them to militiamen, they had them available for the Continental Army. They also issued cartridge boxes, and Greene has several references to a new pattern or a new type of cartridge box. And the first one, there's still some discussion about this, but there's one that's stamped C Factory, and it's in Philadelphia. And it's probably the Continental Leather Goods Factory. I think it was on 5th Street. This is one of those surviving boxes. And if you're an archaeologist, you have to look and try to find things. The only things you're going to find are the buckles. And these buckles, let's see if it works now. These buckles, especially these two, have been found on the Camden battlefield of 1780. But these are coming through Prince Edward Courthouse after the race to the Dan. This is part of the re-outfitting and re-equipping of the Continental Army. This is one sergeant. You know, I'm a nobody as far as the military is concerned, and was a nobody, okay? A rear rank private, if you would. But the Army was made up of guys like this. And that's what makes the pension document so interesting, because it establishes a personal connection. And some of the things, the exact words that they use and the phrasing sounds exactly like phrasing and words that I used when I was in the Army, in the infantry. And so that gives a really personal connection. But here's a guy nobody had ever heard of, and he's Greene's personal orderly sergeant, okay? Well, what did he do? Well, here it is. And the guy who orders this issue is Colonel John Gunby, who was the nominal commander of the 1st Maryland Infantry. And in 1781, in February, that 1st Maryland Infantry is composed of 8 companies in a unit made up of regiments, former regiments in the Maryland-Delaware Division. They restructured the entire division on a company level, where companies were now were what once were regiments, because the manpower just wasn't there. And then there were 4 light infantry companies. And not only was the race to the Dan hard on men, it was pretty hard on wagons and horses too, judging from this. Tents. When you look at how many tents you are getting issued, how many men you've got, how many more you need, and they're issuing them to people piecemeal at sometimes. I need these because I'm going to join the main army and I've got 25 guys. I need 4 or 5 tents, stuff like that. So some's coming in mass bulk issues, some is coming in dribs and drabs. More importantly, an army doesn't just travel on its stomach, it travels on its feet, especially the feet of the animals that are pulling the wagons. And you look at the issuing of these kinds of things, they're even accounting for how many horseshoe nails they're issuing. And I'm not a horseman, but apparently there's a difference between front hoofs and rear hoofs in terms of the horseshoe, and also the number of nails that are used for the horseshoes. for front and rear hooves. And that was an eye-opener for me, but it wasn't an eye-opener to me to have some bureaucratic guy in the background making an officer account for them. Okay, horses and wagons. All right, some of these wagons were personal owned, some were impressed. The Army tried to make them at Ramsey's mill in North Carolina. They were making them off and on. But when you read this, they're taking count of this, and they're making sure that they've got the record. But then, how do you feed the horses? Greene had been a logistical man, a quartermaster for the Army. But if you're going to be a general and you're going to command an army and you have these strategic aims, the nuts and bolts are making sure that you can achieve those. And the supply system, Greene was adept at that. And in the prizery downstairs, you see that hog shed? That's a common measurement. How are you going to get hay that's been cut to the Army? You have to put it up in bales. He had calculated the weights of the bales, the weights of the horseshoes, the weights of all the leather goods, and then they put them into boxes and barrels and hogsheds and shipped them. And here's what the weights are, so you have an idea of what they are. Now, where it says ordnance, that's from the Confederate Ordnance Manual, because they didn't spell it out quite as clearly, but the horses are the same size. And in fact, the horses of the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, until you're looking at big honking wagon horses, like the Clydesdales, they're almost the same as the ones that Alexander the Great had when he went into Persia. Here's the wagons. Conestogas, everybody's heard of the Conestoga. There's apparently a standard way of painting them and everything. The blue and red one here, one of my former 1st Maryland colleagues owns it, and he's assembled all the original leather that you needed for it. He sometimes hooks it all up and moves it. And when you look at it, how do you figure out? Well, the barrels are set to fit inside the wagon certain ways. Boxes work better, but barrels and hogsheds can be standardized and were, and at the same time, you can produce wagons that are standardized. Again, the logistical network of Nathanael Greene's network. We also have eyewitness accounts, a North Carolina wagon in 1777, but that North Carolina wagon was drawn by I think it was a British officer who saw them while he was a prisoner as they were marching through Philadelphia. So you have a wagon with people in it. Whoa. Greene's constantly saying, no women are to ride, no sick soldiers are to ride. Everybody stays out of the wagon, no personal stuff except maybe some accoutrements. And then here's a Virginia wagon of the 1770s. Okay, that's another example. This information's there, it just takes a while to ferret it out. This is part of an issue that came south. And if you look in the top left column, you can see the several convoys that are coming south. The last one, the ones that leave in March, I have traced them from Philadelphia all the way to 96, where on the 10th of June, a lot of those supplies were issued. Okay, so you're talking about materials coming a long way. And you look at it, camp colors, standards, drums, horsemen's stuff, and you look at that. Well, people, there are no references, except when the British capture them, to American Continental flags, except at the surrender at Charleston. And those were all blown up when the arsenal blew up, when the British were going through it looking for nice pistols and the like, and snapping the flints, and suddenly set the whole place ablaze. But I want to look at that. If you look at the bottom left, Those are dozens of cartridges, okay? So you're looking at huge numbers of ammunition. Military stores wagons were built a little bit stronger because they had to carry more. And Baron von Steuben said what goes in which box, how many boxes of such go in a wagon, and each regiment would have a wagon, an armory wagon, and it would have an arms chest with spare weapons, all the spare parts, tools, cartridges, and by the way, the cartridge boxes for 69 caliber round ball with buck and ball were painted red, another little thing that comes out in some of this. And yet the wagon, it also is carrying the food for the horse and the man and the man's food. And this is all coming from the area around Halifax in a week, 10 days following the crossing of the dam. Here they're making cartridges. They dragooned, assigned, detailed, however you want to, whatever word you want to use, numerous men to make cartridges. They're not making them in the field most of the time. Although riflemen, because their rifles had different sized barrels, so the bore was different, they had to have their own mold. If you didn't have the mold for your rifle was worthless. And so they had to make their own. They were issued 1 pound bars of lead to make their bullets with when they were equipped with powder for cartridges. But when you look at the people who are doing this, look who stops here and gets a horse, and the artillerymen are responsible for a lot of the cartridges. And after Guilford Courthouse, Anthony Singleton comes here, draws a horse, and he supplies. And when he came back to the Army, he came back with 4 cannon to replace the ones lost at Guilford Courthouse. Okay, what do we know about these? Charleville muskets, 69 caliber, firing buck and ball, 1 big ball and 3 little balls. That's a standard American load for the Continental Army. The British, contrary to general knowledge, the legend, were also using buck and ball. Sumter, when he was hit at Blackstocks, was hit in the back with buckshot, not a ball. If he had been hit in the spine with a Brown Bess ball, he wouldn't have survived to be such a thorn and pain in the neck for Greene. What do we know about them? Well, here is a lock plate and the other gun working parts for a Charleville musket that came from outside the Guilford Battleground Park near a monument to 4 guys that a man said were from Delaware. Well, the buttons that they had USA on them, so at least they were Continentals. But we can say that they were carrying Charleville muskets that came. Some of them came through Prince Edward Courthouse to the Army. Some may have been brought with them, but they're marked with a U.S. A lot of people say that mark is post-war. When you find something on a battlefield, it almost in a context relating to the battle, you're almost certain to be correct when you say that it relates to the battle and therefore you can date it. Okay, archaeology has revealed truth. It was there, you have to explain it. Okay, and the next thing you have to do is say, what would it take to disprove what I just said, too? That's the key part of science. Okay, here they're issuing them. And when you look at it, they're issuing whole sets of them. 21 muskets, that's probably going to a company, but it would be a full-size platoon if they were getting 20-some muskets. But they're getting all of the other things with it. Look at this, General Lawson, the Virginia general who commanded on the second line's northern flank at Guilford Courthouse, had a personal group of men acting as his bodyguard or lifeguard. Here's the equipment they got. These are all coming from Prince Edward Courthouse. They were repairing them there, and they were sending troops to do the repairing. If you had a skill like being a gunsmith, they'd pull you off the firing line to put you back to making muskets. Clothing. Okay, this is the issue that the bottom line on it, going to various people, is what was issued at 96. But it's just one example because it was on the bottom of the list that I was working from. But here's the original list, and you can see the handicaps that you operate under when you have to have a magnifying glass to read it. And the text gets old after a while. But this is what they're getting. And everything that a man needed to wear. And here's the breaking down of it. I saw a couple of guys wearing dragoon helmets. Okay? They're getting them. They're coming from Prince Edward Courthouse. They're being made there, probably. But you look at the range of things that they're being issued and to whom they're going, and it allows you not to pick and choose, but to reassemble what the Army may have looked like on one given day with materials. Okay, there's also the list of flags. 6 standards, 12 division colors. You have a standard, a regimental standard in the middle, and it will have the regimental name on it and everything. And then you'll have 2 division colors which represent the 2 wings of a battalion. Okay, 144 camp colors are ones that go on each end of a company line so that they're aligned correctly. Now, what do we know about these? Well, I've got one reference that I've seen in 40 years of looking at the Maryland-Delaware troops to colors carried by Marylanders, and it's at Hobkirk's Hill. And it didn't get captured there. The British claim to have captured them. The 3 on the left were captured by Tarleton from a Virginia detachment that was going to the relief to relieve the troops in Charleston, and Charleston surrendered. And they got chopped up pretty bad because of Buford's tactical mistakes at a place called Waxhaws, and the 3 colors were captured. These were offered to SAR, the Cincinnati, a whole range of patriotic organizations for a price. I talked to people about this, and emailing and stuff like that, turned down flat. As it went, most of them went for like $1.25 million. That's a lot more than they paid for them when they were sent in Philadelphia and then sent south. But what's interesting is there's no regimental number. But this is the regimental standard. And you can tell that because it's got a canton with rows of stars in it. 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. If you take that standard and it's blowing in a light breeze, it looks like the Betsy Ross flag. The flag that the military was carrying was like this. And that's a flag that started being used in late 1780 or early 1781. How do we know that? Well, the few surviving ones are somewhat dated. But recently, quite out of the blue, the one on the lower right turned up in California with an impeccable chain of title or provenance to the family of the guy who commanded the Fair Forest Regiment in 78 and 79. And in 80, he wouldn't be carrying this flag because it was obsolete. That's why it survived. So we're looking at stuff that is really intriguing, but it's showing you that it's not a standard thing. These are people, and when you're dealing with people, you're dealing with idiosyncrasies. Okay, here's what we end up with. From Cowpens to South Boston, it's the longest battle of the war. And it's far longer than the Over Mountain Victory Trail, but nobody's ever heard of it except people like us. And there aren't a whole lot of kids there, just like people said last night. But when you look at starting this and how it's put together, The key thing that you have, and these are magic numbers, if you would. They're marching 12.5 miles a day. A long day's march is 15, but statistically it's 12.5 miles a day. There's a other distance that is 6.25, and that distance is how far you can go from camp if you're authorized to leave camp, or if you're a paroled prisoner and you can't go further than 6.25 miles away from the camp. Appears all over the place. These are magic numbers at distances that you find in every foot-oriented society. That's why when you look at where the courthouses of counties are located in the eastern states, how long does it take you to get to the courthouse from the edge of the county in one day? If you're foot-oriented, it's going to take you all day. You do your business in the county seat on the middle day, and then you go home. And this is true in West Africa. It's true in England and Scotland on market days and things like that. So it should be no surprise that it's this way here. When the Army was advancing, their frontage was 6.25 miles. That means their men were foraging, and still some discussion about this. If one battalion was doing it to the left flank, the other was doing it to the right flank, they might have done 6.25 miles, 6.5 miles. But if one battalion was responsible for that frontal foraging, their front of their march was 6.25 miles. And that's what they swept clear. They took everything that was usable. And if you were not a friend to America, you didn't get a receipt. If you were a friend to America, you got a receipt that you could use in paying your taxes. This changes when Greene goes to South Carolina and he's trying to reestablish government. So it's stripping it. When they get across the Dan, they start getting more provisions. But the British are operating now in an area that has been stripped totally of provisions. And in February, the crops aren't in. Everything that was in a smokehouse or a corn crib had already been swept up. And one of the people who fought with the 23rd of Foot at Guilford Courthouse put a little note on the front of his journal on the inside cover of it. He had some drawings. They were really neat drawings. And he wrote on this, "Today we march to fight the enemy. For the last week we have been fighting starvation." And that's the legacy of moving across this kind of landscape. At the end, the Americans have got to where they're able to resupply themselves. The British can't. And the British, the closer the Americans got to it, to Halifax, the easier it was to do this. But it's still a 4-day trip from Prince Edward Courthouse to Halifax. Wagons up, wagons back, loading the wagons. A horse can only really work with a wagon for about 5 days before it has to take a day off. So when you start adding all this stuff up, these distances on the landscape, how important the landscape was to Greene and to the Army. Now, the last thing that I put here is the amateurs study tactics. And one of the things I've noted over 40 plus years of reenacting is that the reenactors are really good at loading and firing their weapons. They're slow, but they're good. They don't march very well. And when it comes to moving a group of men across a landscape, a battalion-sized group of men, they were really hurting. And this is what von Steuben did when he was at Valley Forge. He didn't instruct people in the manual. They already knew how to do that. He just made everybody do it the same way. But he made officers drill their men so that they knew it, and so the men would know their officers. And the second thing he did, he made officers from captains on up march men across the landscape. Okay, and this pays off later, but that's the real miracle of von Steuben's thing, that he moved this way. Now, I made a comment about how fast our muskets, rifles shot and everything. no man was supposed to be dismissed from the awkward squad until he could load and fire 5 times and start with a loaded musket, so he's firing 6 times in 3 minutes. Okay, that's only 2 shots a minute. Frederick the Great said 4. And I know that if you're not loading by the manual and you're using a slightly undersized ball, okay, you can shoot 6 times in 1 minute and still have reasonable accuracy. Rifles, they're different. But I timed a guy in a shoot, rapid fire with a musket, and he got off a shot every 15 seconds for the first 2 minutes, and then the event was over. And some of the research that we're doing and discussions we're having now about riflemen, they probably did patch their first ball. But after that, there's a premium based on speed of loading and firing, and they probably didn't patch their ball. And so there's all these little misconceptions and stuff. No rifle balls from the Revolutionary War era that I've seen have rifling marks on them, but they were patched anyway. So you couldn't tell that. But I've babbled on long enough. It's an accumulation of information that just comes at me from everywhere, and I find stuff all the time. And I'll just leave with one thing. It's a request. If you have an ancestor, okay, stretching maybe on a brother of a guy who is an ancestor, who was killed at the Battle of Camden in 16th of August, 1780, okay? He's not a guy who's going to make a pension, apply for a pension. But if he was killed there, I would sure like to know his name, his height, and his age. And the reason I ask that is we've now recovered almost 12.5 bodies from the Camden battlefield, plus a British and Tory, who is probably a Native American Lumbee fighting with the North Carolina Highlanders. Okay, we are close to identifying maybe 3 guys, but there's probably 500 more bodies on that battlefield that we're starting to turn up. And it's long, slow work, it's expensive, and this way you can participate in bringing one of you boys home. Something that the soldiers, veterans are trying to do now with World War II and Korean War and Vietnam War dead. But it's really something when you can put a name on a guy who's been there buried in an unmarked grave for almost 250 years. Okay, questions? Yes, sir. And all right, I learned my lesson last night. I have to ask the lady first.
2 ladies.
Is this anywhere on the internet? Because it was difficult to read a lot of things.
What do you mean? Is what I just showed here?
Yeah.
No.
In a book? In one of your books?
This will probably be part of a chapter in the book on Utah Springs, which is about 40% complete. Hobkirk's Hill is under contract, and the last vestiges of my obligations, except for galley proofing, go in next week. That's being followed by 96 and Augusta, the twin sieges in the backcountry, and they'll probably be out next year. They're about 80% complete. And Utah Springs is coming. I can't give you a date, but it's gotten easier because we've amassed all this stuff by finding it, and the men are largely the same from 96 to Utah Springs, and that makes it a lot easier. But no, am I going to put this on the internet? Hell no. There's so much junk on the internet, it would be lost in the shuffle. And I'm not a great fan of the internet. Computers have made us a lot more productive, but they haven't lightened our workload. And the internet has made a lot of things readily available, but they've sent out a lot of garbage that makes my life worse. It's like the pop-top rings from the old beer cans when you're metal detecting on an archaeological site. And those of you who have done that know what I'm talking about. Yes, ma'am, further back.
Did you get any viable DNA from the Camden soldiers?
Yes.
Are you accepting?
Pardon?
Are you accepting DNA?
Yes. If you had an ancestor who was killed at the Battle of Camden, we would be glad to have that stuff. They are using a lot of DNA files like Ancestry.com, but if you have a name, it makes it so much easier. And if you have a name, if you have that, don't have a name, but you have their height and their age, it makes it possible to narrow the list of names down to, in some cases, 3 or 4 people. But yes, and it's not that I don't want to share this information. I do it like this so that you can ask the questions that may help me too. But too much of this stuff gets out there and then it's corrupted. And it's treated as if it's God's truth. Geez, that's ridiculous. I mean, this is like an Irish folk tale. It has no beginning and no end. It just is and going along. Yes, sir. Yep.
I have an acquaintance whose grandfather lost his arm and had a battle. Is there a hospital area?
Did he come home?
He came up. Can you find his arm?
No. No. If he didn't get off the battlefield, he probably went to one of the hospitals that were run by the British in Camden, and a lot of those were burned and destroyed when Rawdon evacuated on the 10th of May in '81. But it's an interesting question, and we've had people ask similar questions, and you know, you go and say, boy, that would be really cool. But if you had 10 or 12, 15 guys who lost their arm amputations, and they're all in this one big pile, and you don't have the age or their height, where do you go from there? Because you've got 400 more people that you have to search through. Were they killed? Well, no, but if he filed a pension, the information might be possible to be regenerated. But right now, given the workload that these people are facing and the incredible number of bodies that are still being recovered, bits and pieces, very quiet sort of thing, they're not willing to speculate on stuff like that. But I'm going to raise that question to Allison when I next tell her something.
Question over here.
Pardon?
Question right there.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to point out how beneficial this would be to like West Point, other people running to emphasize knowing your land, knowing your resources. I just think this is going to be a wonderful tool to teach.
Okay. Point taken, places on the landscape, they were occupied. Everybody who buys property today has to go have a chain of title. They go back to what, 1900 now? And we're dealing with who's the landowner of a piece of property where 5 bushels of corn came from in the winter of 1780-81 that went to the Army. Who's the landowner of that land? Well, we have the guy's name because he got a receipt, but where was he? And then who are his neighbors? Because when you do a chain of title then, it's not just angles and distances on trees. They say adjoining the lands of and stuff like that. And we could reconstruct some of that landscape, and I've helped do that on a couple of cases. One in Rockbridge County, but we weren't looking at material like this. And Rockbridge County is really interesting because they have a company that went off to war, and their names are all known, the Rockbridge Rifles. And you hear that, everybody, yeah, I'm going to be a Rockbridge Rifle. Well, when they got to Hillsborough, they were issued muskets. Okay, but we know their names and their ages, and we know where they were in Rockbridge County. And that means that we can reconstruct some of that landscape. And that would be really interesting when you look at the monument in Halifax. Doug, how many war between the states soldiers are on that? 500. That's 500 people killed, died of disease, died of wounds in less than 4 years. What was the population of Halifax County in 1860? You lose 500 of your breeding stock males, looking at it in biological terms. That's going to shift the whole functionality of the county. But it's a disaster. The only comparative thing I've seen is on French monuments where World War I, and then World War II has 4 names, and World War I has 200. And these are little villages. The war's impact on the landscape. Who worked the land after these guys didn't come home? Who worked the land after these Revolutionary War guys didn't come home? And a lot of them, when they got out, did 2 things. They claimed their initially they got their back pay, arrears, and they got a certificate for land, depending on your rank and how long you had served. Well, that guy is standing there, the guy comes through the line, he gets all this stuff, puts the pay in his pocket. The next guy he talks to is a land shark. He says, I'll give you $200 for that shit for land. Sure. That's why the land records in Western Maryland, they still don't know who owns the land out there because of this. In the Ohio country, it's a little bit different because they had worked it out. But the landscape and people on that landscape are what make this work. And what do you do when you find 2 or 3 bodies in a place, an isolated farmstead, and they all have bullets in them? Where do you take that? And were they in the militia? Yes, but the militia rolls aren't very good, and these guys didn't survive to file pensions. Okay, were they mentioned in one other pension file where they go and they say, okay, we went out and we were gone 3 weeks and 2 days suppressing the Tories. That's a really common phrase for the Whig militia all over North Carolina. And one of them says, we found 3 men who were making muskets for the Tories. We killed them on the spot. Okay, and you go, whoops. Now, one last comment. Everybody has questions about the veracity and the accuracy of these pensions. After the siege of 96 was broken off, a group of Virginians from this area, Halifax and Pennsylvania counties, were marching, and they sort of were straggling, and they went into the house of a Dutchman to get a fix of buttermilk. And while they were there regaling themselves with this buttermilk, Colonel Lee and one of his officers came in and arrested them. And he says, you're deserters. And so he goes and he says, comes back, you have a choice. You can enlist in my legion for the war, not for 3 years of the war, for the war, or you can have, I will submit you right now to 500 lashes with a whip. One guy, the first guy we found with this said, I was really not happy about this, and I had to debate whether I was going to serve for the war. And it was all, so you get some idea of how the soldiers have been through if they're willing to get whipped with 500 lashes rather than sign up again. Okay, we all signed up, and he mentions their names. Well, of those 6 guys, one of them died before the war ended, and he was dropped from the rolls as dead from Lee's Legion. And one guy had mentioned all of their names. We then identified all of the other guys. One guy, Pennsylvania, one guy, Halifax, one guy from Tennessee, one guy from Georgia, and one guy from Indiana. all mention this incident or enlisting in Legion, and 2 of them gave the date they enlisted in the Legion, which agreed with when this could have happened. And so you've got 5 guys spread all over Georgia and the Carolinas and West who are all saying the same thing happened. It has nothing to do with their service or getting a pension. It's just that they remembered guys who were in their mess, their messmates. But their messmates all remembered them too. And when they put them all, when you put, of the 6 guys, you have 5 guys all write the same incident 50 years after, and they're not in touch with each other. That has to say that these pensions have an accuracy about them that people, a lot of people, like bureaucrats in the VA, are not willing to give them. And that they wouldn't, the Department of the Army and the VA wouldn't give military funerals at first or tombstones to the bodies that we had recovered from Camden. Well, you don't have their dog tags. What's their serial number? Now, what planet are these people from? They didn't give people serial numbers back then. They didn't issue dog tags. But they all had USA buttons scattered all through their bones. And so finally that won out, but there was a long, tormented part of arguing about that. And then the government decided, well, you can't bury them on the battlefield because we don't bury people on the battlefields permanently. Has he been to Gettysburg or the Little Bighorn or any number of other this control? So that's a modern thing that deals with these people too. The fight still goes on. Any other questions?
Hearing none, thank you so much. Spectacular. It's fun. Yes, thank you so much. So, Professor Babbitt, it turns out that my uniform, Professor Babbitt, it turns out that my uniform is the uniform worn by my ancestor in New York Continental Line, sappers. No, he was finished out as a Colonel Christopher Joseph Delazine, who we find at night. Well, he was from New York Continental Line, but we find him at 96, working with Kosciuszko on creating trench guy, and he was wounded, as far as I know, in the hand, the Battle of Eutaw Springs. Joseph Delazine, originally born French, looking to fight British wherever he could, comes down to St. Lawrence, joins New York, and fights for the next 7 years.
He was from New Jersey?
Or? No, he was born in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, but he joined, we first find him at Ticonderoga, and that's where he joins the New York Continental Line.
The uniform of New York and New Jersey.
You're right.
Maryland and Delaware, Virginians, blue and red. And having said that, Lee's Legion officers were certainly wearing blue coats with red basics, not green jackets. We found that issue too. So.
Thank you again.
That's interesting.
Thank you. Okay, now it's time for wreath presentations. And are there any national officers here to present wreaths today? Then Scott Collins, Vice President General, South Atlantic District, SAR, would you present your wreath, sir? Vassar officers presenting a wreath. You're presenting, are you not, Darren? On behalf of the State Society, thank you. We'll now move to Virginia chapters of SAR. The Dan River chapter, Mike Geisinger. Colonel George Waller, Chapter, Andy Doss, President. George Mason, Chapter, President, Ken Morris. George Washington, Chapter, Lawrence Lyle. Culpeper Minutemen, Chapter, Tom Hamill, past President. Patrick Henry, Chapter, Mark R. Day, President. Thomas Jefferson, Chapter, Angus Lamond. Now we move on to Virginia DAR chapter and North Carolina DAR. Behrman Greene, Chapter, Shirley Archer, Regent. John Penn, Chapter, Shotzi Winborn, Regent. Blue Ridge, Chapter, Barbara Day. Colonel Arthur Forbes, Chapter, North Carolina DAR, Marcia Thompson. Thomas Pearson, Chapter, North Carolina DAR, Bonnie Mealer, historian. Other patriotic organizations: Halifax County Historical Society, Barbara Bass, President. Jamestown Society, Ginger Gentry. Order of Founders and Patriots of America, Shane Newcomb. Descendants of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, Cheryl Pope Albert, North Carolina Governor. Historic Staunton River Foundation, Susan Pennington, President. Halifax 1321 UDC, Janet Perkins. Descendants of Valley Forge, Larry McKinley. Are there any more wreaths to be presented? Presenters, thank you very much. You can return to your seats now. And Jimmy Landrum, would you come up and give us a benediction, please?
May we stand for benediction. Almighty God, grant us your mercies as we part. In the coming days, help us to reaffirm our roles as citizens of the United States. Keep before us the privations and sacrifices of our ancestors, who freely gave themselves the cause of liberty and democracy. Endow us with our resolve. Strengthen us as we pledge ourselves to the preservation of the freedoms bestowed by your hand. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Okay, are the colors to be retired in place?
Colors are retired in place.
Thank you, sir. Now it's on to Brunswick stew. Thank you all for coming today. Let's have 3 huzzahs. Hip, hip, huzzah! Hip, hip, huzzah! Hip, hip, huzzah!